Look at the archival footage on the left. 1967. A B-52 bomber drops a payload of chemical flares into a heavy cloud bank over the dense jungles of Laos. Now, look at the high-resolution satellite telemetry on the right. Formed just off the coast of a major agricultural superpower, we see a perfectly geometric, highly anomalous storm cell. The shock hits you instantly. The atmosphere above you is no longer a natural phenomenon. The sky is a manufactured machine. You stockpile canned goods for the next global pandemic. You monitor the news for the flash of a thermonuclear launch. You are looking in the wrong direction. The next mass casualty event will absolutely masquerade as a routine natural disaster. An untraceable, crippling drought that systematically destroys your local food supply chain is not a symptom of global warming. It is an active, kinetic act of war happening right now, completely undetected by the civilian population. We are in a countdown, and the front line is directly overhead. I am handing you the tactical survival manual for the modern era of atmospheric warfare. Through the raw, boots-on-the-ground optics of military meteorology, you will learn to completely rewire your perception of the natural world. You must learn to read the shifting cloud formations, not for the benign daily weather forecast, but to spot incoming, untraceable artillery strikes disguised as sudden flash floods. Ground level, the Republic of Vietnam, 1967. The peak of the monsoon season. Rain falls in thick, suffocating sheets, completely whitewashing the horizon. A heavy military supply truck convoy spins its tires, sinking straight down to the axles in a volatile sea of red laterite clay. The mud acts exactly like a liquid quicksand, silently swallowing diesel engines and desperate men. This is the sheer, physical terror of an environment actively fighting against you. Deep inside a blacked-out tactical operations tent, the combat meteorologist stares at the glowing radar readouts. He does not just see rain. He sees a thermodynamic weapon detonating in slow motion over the jungle canopy. His trained eyes track the unnatural density of the precipitation patterns. The data streams indicate a localized atmospheric saturation that defies every known meteorological model. He realizes, with cold dread, that someone has hacked the hydrologic cycle. The military command understood a brutal, unyielding truth of jungle warfare. Logistics dictate absolute survival. You cannot effectively bomb a supply path hidden beneath a triple canopy rainforest, but you can effortlessly wash it away. They coined a new, chilling operational slogan: "Make mud, not war." The objective was to weaponize the terrain itself, turning the essential dirt roads of the enemy into an impassable, suffocating nightmare that paralyzes all troop movements. This brutal strategy birthed Project Popeye, a highly classified operation designed to hack the sky. Transport aircraft were heavily modified to systematically seed the atmosphere directly over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They did not drop high explosives. Instead, they dispensed payloads of silver iodide and lead iodide directly into the hearts of the massive, looming monsoon clouds. They were injecting a synthetic catalyst into a chaotic, volatile system, waiting for the devastating reaction. To understand the violence of this reaction, you must look at the microscopic level. The silver iodide acts as a highly aggressive condensation nucleus. Its specific crystalline structure perfectly mimics the geometric shape of natural ice. This structural deception tricks the ambient atmospheric water vapor, forcing it to violently and rapidly bind to the foreign chemical agent. The military was effectively forcing premature, completely unnatural precipitation over a targeted coordinate. This microscopic chemical deception triggers a massive, localized atmospheric collapse. The artificially heavy water droplets can no longer maintain their suspension in the upper air currents. Gravity takes over. A localized shower mutates into a catastrophic, unnatural deluge. The combat meteorologist watches the pressure gauges drop violently. The sky is literally falling, engineered by human hands to weaponize a fundamental law of physics against an unsuspecting enemy force below. The sheer scale of this atmospheric manipulation was staggering and entirely unprecedented in human history. Over the relentless course of the covert operation, the United States Air Force flew more than 2,000 dedicated sorties into the volatile storm fronts. They systematically expended over 47,000 individual cloud seeding cartridges. They were relentlessly feeding chemical fuel into a thermodynamic engine, driving the localized weather patterns into absolute overdrive. Down on the ground, the results were apocalyptic. The red clay liquefied. Entire hillsides gave way, burying supply lines under thousands of tons of suffocating mud. The front line dissolved into a chaotic, unnavigable swamp. This was not a collateral effect. It was a highly calculated surgical strike, utilizing the raw, unbridled kinetic energy of the Earth itself. We were no longer fighting a conventional war of attrition. We were actively conducting a chaotic symphony of fluid dynamics. But hacking a planetary system carries a massive, terrifying risk of blowback. The combat meteorologist reviews the final post-operation climate reports, his finger tracing a completely impossible data spike. The environmental modification did not just increase the immediate rainfall. It shattered the regional meteorological equilibrium. The historical baseline was completely obliterated. An artificial anomaly had permanently scarred the intricate climate record of the entire region. The data reveals a terrifying, undeniable paradox that the Pentagon fought for decades to keep classified. The localized ecosystem had been pushed far past its natural breaking point by an invisible, untraceable trigger. The question echoes through the empty operations center, hanging in the damp, heavy air. Why did the seasonal monsoon suddenly last 45 days longer than the historical average, drowning an entire army under an endless, manufactured flood? The answer to that 45-day unnatural flood is not found on the muddy ground. You have to climb directly into the belly of the beast. Through the viewport of a heavily modified C-130 Hercules, the atmospheric physicist stares into a pitch-black wall of a cumulonimbus thunderhead. The airframe groans violently under the extreme, punishing turbulence. The altimeter spins wildly as the aircraft punches into the absolute darkness of the storm cell. We are riding a piece of screaming aluminum straight into a kinetic nightmare. This is where that microscopic silver iodide particle, dropped from the fuselage, begins its catastrophic work. We are not just observing weather. We are flying inside an active fuse. To understand the sheer terror gripping the physicist, you must abandon a fundamental misconception. A storm cloud is not just harmless floating water vapor drifting across the sky. It is an unexploded bomb. It is a massive, suspended reservoir of raw, terrifying power. We are looking at a nuclear weapon's worth of stored energy, simply waiting for a detonator. The telemetry flashing across the acoustic-damped consoles reveals the true, horrifying scale of this battle space. A single, typical thunderstorm holds kinetic energy completely equivalent to a 20-kiloton nuclear warhead. That is the exact destructive yield of the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. But this energy is completely invisible, locked away as the latent heat of condensation. The physicist watches the thermal readouts spike into the red zone as the payload deploys. When the chemical seed physically forces those supercooled water droplets to freeze, it instantly triggers a violent chain reaction. You are witnessing a thermodynamic explosion happening in real time right outside the reinforced cockpit glass. The physical process of freezing releases a massive amount of trapped heat directly into the surrounding air column. This sudden thermal burst creates catastrophic, screaming updrafts. These vertical winds act like a gigantic atmospheric vacuum cleaner. They violently suck thousands of tons of additional moisture directly into the heart of the expanding storm cell. The internal environment of the cloud becomes a chaotic engine of destruction. The sensors record a brutal, immediate physical shock to the system. This localized, chemically forced reaction drops the ambient temperature within the targeted cloud column by an astonishing 32 degrees Fahrenheit in mere minutes. The sky is rapidly freezing itself to death. That instantaneous temperature crash is the exact moment the trap snaps shut. The moisture condenses, the weight becomes unbearable, and gravity claims its prize. The physicist grips the armrests as the C-130 drops in a terrifying freefall through the dead air. The turbulence is the sound of the atmosphere being ripped apart and frantically stitched back together. Every single flashing light on the instrument panel represents another 1,000 gallons of water being forcefully evicted from the sky. The radar screen is completely saturated with heavy precipitation warnings. We are flying through the blast radius of a thermal detonation, surrounded by an ocean of water that was just weaponized by a handful of chemicals. This is the absolute, terrifying genius of the operation unfolding around us. This military strike is not magically creating catastrophic weather out of thin air. It is actively hacking the planet's existing thermal engine. It is taking the natural, chaotic energy of the Earth and violently forcing it to obey a highly specific, tactical command. By forcing that latent heat to release on a predetermined schedule, the military transforms a passing storm into a targeted ballistic strike. They are gathering the scattered global power of the monsoon and concentrating its absolute destructive force onto a single, precise grid coordinate. You are no longer fighting soldiers. You are fighting the sky itself. This is exactly how you extend a seasonal rainstorm by an impossible 45 days. You do not just seed one cloud. You systematically detonate every single storm front that rolls in off the ocean. The physicist stares at the glowing green radar blobs, watching them merge into a solid, impenetrable wall of artificial, relentless hostility. The sheer roaring noise inside the aircraft is deafening, a constant reminder of the physical violence unleashed outside. Every drop of rain hitting the windshield is a microscopic piece of shrapnel aimed at the supply lines below. The tactical map shows the ground literally dissolving under the weight of this stolen, concentrated water. The atmosphere has been successfully recruited as an active combatant. The military achieved the ultimate high ground, turning the basic building blocks of life into an untraceable instrument of mass destruction. We breached the sacred mechanics of nature, and the resulting data stream paints a picture of absolute, terrifying dominion over the elements. The aircraft banks hard, escaping the darkest core of the artificial supercell. But the catastrophic chain reaction we just ignited in the stratosphere is only half of the terrifying equation. The water is falling, but the true horror of this thermodynamic weapon is what happens when those millions of tons of kinetic energy finally smash into the Earth below. The kinetic energy we unleashed in the stratosphere does not just vanish. It slams into the Earth as a relentless, liquid bombardment. Inside the Tactical Operations Center, the combat meteorologist watches the satellite feed glow red. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, a 1,000-mile artery pulsing with enemy logistics, is buried under a triple canopy jungle. You cannot bomb what you cannot see. But the radar shows those millions of tons of water seeking the lowest ground, hunting the supply lines. How do you sever a heavily fortified supply chain hidden deep inside one of the most hostile environments on the planet without dropping a single high-explosive bomb? The answer is terrifyingly simple. You let gravity and fluid dynamics do the killing. The operator stares at the topographical map, watching the red tactical lines representing roads and bridges. They are not waiting for an airstrike. They are waiting for the mountainside itself to liquefy and erase the enemy from the map. This is the reality of environmental warfare. The front line is everywhere the water flows. The meteorologist taps the glass screen, tracking the artificial deluge. The soil saturation levels on the sensors are spiking straight into the red zone. The jungle floor is acting like a sponge that has reached its absolute limit. Every additional drop of seeded rain now instantly converts into surface runoff. The earth is losing its structural integrity. The ground beneath their feet is weaponized. The tactical data scrolling across the terminal is staggering. The artificial extension of the monsoon season is forcing localized flooding that reaches depths of up to 3 feet on elevated roadways. This is not standing water. It is a raging, muddy torrent tearing through the jungle at lethal velocities. Trucks, armor, and infantry are caught in a surge they cannot shoot at and cannot outrun. The meteorologist logs the destruction. The weather is executing a perfect flanking maneuver. Water is the ultimate penetrator. It ignores camouflage, bypasses anti-aircraft batteries, and flows effortlessly through fortified bunkers. The tactical map shows the red supply routes blinking out one by one. A heavily loaded transport convoy hits a 3-foot surge of moving water and becomes instantly paralyzed. Engines drown in the silt. Axles snap in the submerged craters. The convoy does not need to be destroyed by Hellfire missiles. It is already dead, entombed in the laterite clay. The assault escalates from mere flooding to total geological collapse. River crossings are completely washed out, erasing the only viable paths across the valleys. But the true horror lies in the sheer weight of the water. The extreme soil saturation triggers massive landslides. The meteorologist watches entire grid squares simply slide off the map. Millions of tons of mud shear away from the bedrock, burying anti-aircraft batteries and troop encampments under a suffocating, inescapable wave. Through the eyes of the meteorologist, the sheer scale of the devastation is hypnotic. You are watching a geological event happening in fast forward. A mountain pass that took thousands of hours of grueling manual labor to carve out is completely erased in 30 seconds of hydromechanical violence. The earth itself is drafted into the infantry. The mud becomes a hyper-lethal obstacle course, swallowing logistical hubs whole and leaving absolutely zero forensic evidence of a military strike. We successfully engineered a natural disaster, turning the basic thermodynamics of the sky into an apex predator. I've spent years analyzing military tactics, but this level of atmospheric manipulation is terrifying. If this scale of warfare blows your mind too, hit the like button. To make sure you do not miss the solution to this global threat, subscribe to the channel. Do you think humanity stands a chance? Let me know in the comments. Right now, the data indicates we are outmatched. The brutal mathematics of logistics tell the final story. You do not need to kill every soldier. You just need to starve their rifles of bullets and their engines of fuel. Declassified intelligence estimates reveal the chilling efficacy of this operation. The weaponized weather reduced enemy supply truck traffic along the trail by an astonishing 30% during the seeding campaigns. That is a massive, crippling blow to an army's circulatory system, achieved entirely through forced rainfall. 30% less food, 30% less ammunition, 30% less medical supplies reaching the front lines. The meteorologist understands the grim translation of these numbers. This is a siege executed by the atmosphere. The enemy is trapped in a constantly dissolving landscape, burning massive amounts of caloric and mechanical energy just to survive the mud. The artificial monsoon is grinding a highly motivated, entrenched military force down to the bone through sheer attrition. Beyond the physical destruction of the bridges and roads, a crushing psychological weight settles over the battlefield. The rain never stops. It beats down on the corrugated tin roofs, a constant, deafening drumbeat of sheer technological supremacy. The meteorologist documents the secondary tactical effect: absolute demoralization. An infantryman can fight a soldier, but you cannot fight the rain. You cannot shoot a landslide. The enemy can only endure until the mud eventually claims them. This covert operation proved a horrifying concept. Weather is the ultimate force multiplier. The tactical map in the operations center is no longer just a representation of the ground. It is a three-dimensional battle space where the atmosphere dictates the victor. We broke the seal on meteorological warfare. We proved that by manipulating phase changes of water in the stratosphere, we could collapse the infrastructure of an entire nation-state without ever officially declaring a kinetic war. The meteorologist signs off on the final damage assessment, shutting down the glowing tactical displays. The trail is drowned, the supply lines are severed, and the mission is a terrifying success. But unleashing this kind of planetary power comes with an inescapable cost. When the classified reports finally hit the desks of lawmakers back in Washington, the tactical victory instantly transforms into a strategic nightmare. The architects of the storm realize they have opened Pandora's box. The tactical victory in the jungle instantly transforms into a strategic nightmare back home. I step out of the monsoon and into the claustrophobic tension of a United States Senate hearing room in 1974. The air is thick with stale tobacco smoke and the low, anxious hum of live microphones. The architects of the storm are sitting under the glaring lights. They are sweating. You can smell the panic in this room. The senators shuffle through classified folders with trembling hands. These are men who navigate the Cold War daily, who calculate the acceptable losses of thermonuclear exchanges. Yet the data streams sitting before them on these polished mahogany tables evoke a completely different kind of dread. The front line has shifted from the earth to the atmosphere. They did not convene this emergency tribunal because the military failed. They convened it because the military succeeded, far beyond its own theoretical models. This is the ultimate paradox of power. The Pentagon successfully hacked the sky, weaponizing the very rain, and the results terrified the top brass so deeply that they are now begging the world to ban their own technological breakthrough. The operation leaked. The classified existence of Project Popeye breached the vault and hit the press, triggering an immediate global diplomatic crisis. The international community is reeling from the impact. The realization that a superpower can secretly alter another nation's climate without declaring war shatters the established rules of engagement. The sky is no longer neutral territory. The panic in this Senate room is not rooted in environmental morality. It is a raw, tactical calculation of mutual vulnerability. If American scientists can drown a supply route in Southeast Asia today, what prevents a rival superpower from locking a crippling winter over the Midwestern agricultural belt tomorrow? You cannot track a weather front on early warning radar. You cannot shoot down a drought. The threat of meteorological warfare bypasses every defensive grid we have ever built. A weaponized storm carries no shrapnel, leaves no radiation signature, and provides no definitive proof of a hostile launch. It is the perfect, untraceable strike. This realization hits the political establishment like a physical blow. The arms race has evolved into a domain where mutually assured destruction is invisible. This overwhelming terror forces an unprecedented diplomatic retreat. The geopolitical shockwave drives the superpowers directly to the United Nations. By 1977, this collective panic crystallizes into the Environmental Modification Convention. They call it ENMOD. It is a desperate ceasefire drawn up in the face of an uncontrollable thermodynamic threat that respects no borders. The ENMOD treaty is pushed through with the frantic speed of a wartime triage protocol. The document explicitly prohibits the military or any hostile use of environmental modification techniques. The diplomats are trying to put the safety catch back onto a planetary-scale weapon. They are attempting to draw a strict legal boundary across the troposphere to prevent an ecological world war. I read the specific language of the treaty. The text targets the scale of the destruction. It strictly bans any techniques having widespread, long-lasting, or severe effects as the means of destruction, damage, or injury to any other state party. You can no longer hijack the Earth's thermal engine to crush a foreign economy. The atmosphere is legally decommissioned as an active combat zone. On paper, the global crisis is averted. The politicians shake hands, the hearing rooms empty out, and the public is assured that the weather will remain a strictly natural phenomenon. But as I scrutinize the final, ratified pages of the United Nations agreement, the illusion of safety shatters. This treaty is not a shield against atmospheric manipulation. It is a perfectly constructed legal smokescreen. In their desperate rush to outlaw the apocalypse, the architects of this convention left a colossal blind spot in the architecture of the law. They banned the offensive deployment of the weapon, but they failed to restrict the development of the underlying technology. You cannot legislate the laws of physics. The kinetic potential of the sky remains fully intact, waiting for a new, smarter operator. Here is the fatal flaw buried deeply in the international legal code. The treaty contains a massive loophole. It explicitly does not ban environmental modification for peaceful or scientific purposes. You are forbidden from destroying an enemy with a synthetic hurricane, but you are entirely permitted to manipulate the exact same atmospheric dynamics under the banner of ecological research. The weapon was not dismantled. It was simply rebranded. This single clause redefines the future of modern warfare. If you want to deploy a weather weapon in the 21st century, you do not paint it in military camouflage. You disguise it as climate mitigation. The ultimate tactical loophole is born, and it leaves the entire global population sitting blindly, directly in the crosshairs. I step out of the stifling archives of 1977 and walk straight into the sterile, blinding light of a hyper-modern research facility in 2026. Through the reinforced glass of the control room, the atmosphere is electric with an exhausted panic. Out on the runway, a high-altitude autonomous drone idles, its engines screaming. We are no longer signing treaties to ban weather weapons. We are building them faster than ever, entirely legally, under the flawless disguise of planetary salvation. From the perspective of the lead atmospheric physicist, the telemetry on these monitors is a ticking countdown. The drone rockets vertically off the tarmac, tearing through the lower atmosphere toward the stratosphere. This is not a military strike. There are no national insignias on the fuselage. This is a privately funded, perfectly legal climate mitigation launch. Yet the payload secured inside that drone possesses a kinetic potential that dwarfs any conventional explosive ever detonated. The perfect cover story was born the moment the ink dried on that United Nations agreement. You cannot declare war by manipulating the climate, but you are actively encouraged to manipulate it to save the world from burning. To the exhausted physicist tracking this launch, the distinction is entirely meaningless. The atmosphere does not care about our legal definitions. When you force a thermodynamic change on a planetary scale, the brutal physics of destruction remain exactly the same. The drone reaches an altitude of 65,000 feet. It breaches the stratosphere, entering the freezing, stable layer high above our natural weather systems. Here, it deploys its payload, stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI. The control room screens light up as a massive plume of sulfur dioxide is pumped into the thin air. These reflective microscopic particles are designed to act like a planetary mirror, bouncing incoming solar radiation straight back into the dark void of space. It is the ultimate technological fix for a boiling planet. The data streaming into the acoustic-damped server room is undeniable. The cooling fans scream as the supercomputers process the fluid dynamics models. They show that a globally coordinated stratospheric aerosol injection program could artificially cool the entire planet by 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit within a single decade. On paper, it is a triumph of human engineering. It looks like the absolute salvation of our fragile species. But the physicist staring at the glowing monitors is not celebrating. The adrenaline in the room is not from victory. It is born of sheer, cold terror. The supercomputers are running a global simulation, mapping how that sulfur dioxide plume will wrap around the Earth. You cannot isolate the sky. You cannot cool one hemisphere without violently destabilizing the other. The model shows the aerosol shield locking into place over the global north, successfully dropping the ambient temperatures. This sudden artificial cooling in the northern hemisphere triggers a catastrophic chain reaction. The fluid dynamics models flash red across the screens. By rapidly altering the temperature in the north, the operation aggressively shifts the massive thermal gradients that govern the planet's weather patterns. Specifically, it destabilizes the intertropical convergence zone. This is the delicate, equatorial belt of low pressure that drives the heavy rains essential for global agriculture. The physicist watches the red warning indicators spread across the digital globe like a hemorrhagic fever. The intertropical convergence zone is not just a meteorological curiosity. It is the beating heart of the Earth's water cycle. By playing God in the stratosphere with sulfur dioxide, the injection program violently yanks this critical pressure belt away from its natural position. The global north gets its much-needed cooling, but the global south is sacrificed to the resulting atmospheric chaos. The data projections stabilize, revealing the ultimate, horrifying cost of this localized cooling. The artificial shift in the thermal gradient threatens to completely collapse the Indian monsoon system. The seasonal rains that have watered the subcontinent for millennia simply vanish from the simulation. The clouds dissolve. The soil bakes into dust. This single, unregulated geoengineering flight creates a cascading anomaly that threatens catastrophic drought for the most populated region on the planet. Look at the sheer scale of the collateral damage flashing on the server room monitors. The collapse of the monsoon system means immediate, inescapable starvation for over 2 billion people in Southeast Asia. 2 billion human lives erased, not by a barrage of intercontinental ballistic missiles, but by a legal, privately funded drone launch designed to mitigate climate change. This is the ticking time bomb of the 21st century, hanging invisibly right above your head in the upper atmosphere. If an enemy state bombed the agricultural centers of Southeast Asia, destroying the food supply for 2 billion citizens, it would trigger an immediate nuclear response. It would be World War III. But under the rules of the 1977 Convention, this catastrophic drought is legally protected. It is classified as an unfortunate side effect of a peaceful scientific endeavor. The aggressor does not even need to declare war. They simply claim they were trying to cool their own borders. There is no shrapnel to recover. There is no radiation signature to track back to a hostile government. When the rivers dry up and the crops turn to ash, the victims will blame bad luck, an angry god, or natural global warming. They will never look up at the stratosphere and realize they were just hit by an untraceable weapon of mass destruction. The physicist stares at the projected death toll, physically sickened by the realization that we have built an apocalypse machine with a corporate logo. The cooling fans in the server room scream, but they cannot drown out the silence of a planet unknowingly walking into a trap. This is what the militarization of the climate truly looks like today. It is a desperate nation acting unilaterally, launching autonomous drones into the freezing void to hack the Earth's thermostat. One push of a button in a sterile control room sentences half the globe to famine, all while operating completely out in the open, fully compliant with international law. The era of localized cloud seeding over muddy jungle trails is ancient history. We have scaled up the threat to a planetary level. You are living in a closed thermodynamic loop where a single aerosol injection can shift the balance of global power overnight. The atmosphere is no longer a shared canopy protecting humanity. It is a violently contested battle space. If you control the sulfur dioxide plume in the north, you control who starves in the south. The sky is now a brutal zero-sum game. The drone completes its delivery, its telemetry flashing green as the synthetic cloud disperses into the upper atmosphere. The physicist buries his face in his hands, exhausted, knowing the climate feedback loop is now irreversible. We have hacked the sky to save ourselves, and in doing so, we have armed the ultimate global weapon. And as we will soon discover, you do not even need an aircraft to pull the trigger anymore. The next strike will come directly from the ground up, entirely invisible. The next strike comes directly from the ground up, entirely invisible. I am taking you inside a windowless signals intelligence center where the air conditioning struggles against the intense heat of screaming server racks. The combat meteorologist leans closer to a glowing terminal, tracking a thermal anomaly that defies every natural model. This is the new front line. On the primary screen, a massive, bleeding red heat map hovers menacingly. It is an anomalous high-pressure ridge, perfectly and artificially locked over a rival nation's primary agricultural belt. Down there on the surface, the soil is baking to dust, and millions are facing an imminent famine. But up here, in the cold glow of the monitors, it is just a data set. The meteorologist wipes sweat from his brow, his pulse accelerating as the terrifying reality sets in. If a rival nation's wheat harvest suddenly fails due to a historic 50-year drought, how do you prove before the United Nations that it was a deliberate act of war? You are staring at a weapon of mass destruction disguised as a bad summer. The victim nation is bleeding out, their economy collapsing as critical rivers evaporate into cracked mud. They will beg for international aid, blaming poor luck and shifting climate patterns. They will never realize they are under a concentrated, tactical bombardment. The perfect crime is unfolding in real time, right above our heads. The days of flying modified transport planes into storm cells to drop silver iodide are over. That was analog warfare, clumsy and highly visible. Today, the assault requires no aircraft, no pilots, and no physical payload crossing a sovereign border. You simply need a transmitter and a fundamental understanding of planetary thermodynamics. The analyst taps the glass of the monitor, tracing the invisible point of origin. Deep within the aggressor's territory sits a sprawling installation of aluminum towers. These are ionospheric heaters. They utilize massive arrays of phase-locked antennas standing silent in the wilderness, aimed directly at the roof of our world. These silent metallic forests do not drop chemical agents. Instead, they pump millions of watts of high-frequency radio waves straight up into the upper atmosphere. They are firing pure energy into the ionosphere, a highly charged layer of gas sitting hundreds of miles above the Earth's surface. The combat meteorologist watches the telemetry stream in, horrified by the sheer, brute force physics of the operation. When those millions of watts strike the ionosphere, the targeted patch of gas absorbs the radio frequency energy. The temperature spikes drastically, causing the atmosphere itself to expand outward. By heating these specific, localized patches of the ionosphere, the operators are literally sculpting the sky. They create a massive, invisible thermal bulge in the upper atmosphere. It is like dropping a giant boulder into a fast-moving river. The obstruction violently forces the currents to divert around it. The river they are damming is the polar jet stream. This high-altitude ribbon of furious wind dictates the weather patterns for the entire hemisphere. The thermal bulge pushes down against the stratosphere, acting as an impenetrable atmospheric wall. The jet stream hits this invisible barrier and is forced to drastically alter its trajectory. You are watching a planetary arterial system being surgically bypassed. Shifting the polar jet stream by just 50 miles changes everything. It diverts the natural flow of rain-bearing low-pressure systems, forcing them thousands of miles off course. You are effectively starving the enemy of their water supply without firing a single bullet. By holding that thermal bulge in place, the operators successfully lock a blocking high-pressure system over the target grid. It acts like an invisible dome of stagnant, superheated air. Day after day, week after week, the sun beats down relentlessly, baking the agricultural heartland below until the vital topsoil turns to useless powder. The combat meteorologist logs the devastating results, his stomach twisting in knots. Because these atmospheric shifts perfectly mimic natural cyclical anomalies, the aggressor maintains absolute plausible deniability. The international community sees a tragic, naturally occurring drought. Only the operators know they pulled the trigger. There is no physical evidence of an attack. There are no bomb craters to photograph, no shrapnel fragments to analyze in a laboratory, and no radioactive fallout to track with a Geiger counter. The casualty rate will eventually rival a nuclear strike, but the history books will record it merely as a severe agricultural failure. We have weaponized the void above us, turning the complex mechanics of fluid dynamics into the ultimate stealth bomber. The combat meteorologist closes the thermal file, knowing the target nation's crops are already dead. The sky is a loaded gun, and tomorrow, any rogue state with a high-frequency antenna array can hold the world hostage. We warned you that a rogue state with a massive antenna array could hold the world hostage. But that threat model is already obsolete. You do not need a multi-billion-dollar ionospheric heater to weaponize the atmosphere anymore. The front line has shifted from massive state-run installations to a terrifying new reality of cheap, decentralized, tactical weather hacking. I'm standing in a scorching desert border region in the Middle East. The heat distortion makes the horizon boil. Through the exhausted eyes of the atmospheric physicist on the ground, a swarm of 50 black autonomous drones ascends rapidly into the dry sky. They are not carrying cameras or conventional explosives. They are carrying a new kind of silent apocalypse. This is the true democratization of meteorological warfare. The chilling hook here is the barrier to entry. You no longer need a $1 trillion military budget to control the sky and crush your enemies. You just need a swarm of cheap drones, a lithium battery supply chain, and a highly aggressive targeting algorithm. The weapon of mass destruction is now affordable. The atmospheric physicist watches the telemetry on a ruggedized tablet. The drone swarm aligns in a precise three-dimensional grid above the border. The sky is completely clear, suffocatingly dry. There are no clouds to seed here, no moisture to chemically freeze. But the operators are not waiting for nature to provide the ammunition. They are forcing the issue. This is not science fiction or a future projection. By 2024, engineers successfully deployed drone swarms utilizing laser-assisted water condensation technology. It moved from the laboratory to the active battlefield in a matter of months. I watched the reports filter through the intelligence community. The escalation was immediate and completely unregulated. The physicist flinches as the drone grid activates. They begin firing short, intense laser pulses directly into the ambient air. It happens in fractions of a microsecond. The sheer kinetic violence of light hitting gas. These concentrated beams are literally ripping electrons from their orbits, ionizing atmospheric nitrogen and oxygen molecules right above our heads. This atmospheric ionization creates microscopic, highly charged plasma channels in the empty air. To the physicist monitoring the localized fluid dynamics, the implications are terrifying. These plasma channels act as perfect, chemical-free condensation nuclei. They are bypassing the need for silver iodide completely, using pure energy to hack the thermodynamic cycle. The monitors spike into the red zone. The plasma channels force the sparse, invisible water vapor scattered in the dry air to instantly bind and clump together. The physicist watches thunderheads materialize literally from the haze. The swarm is aggressively pulling a localized storm system out of nothing, stitching a cumulonimbus cloud together with concentrated laser fire. This is where the geopolitical survival math gets incredibly ugly. This laser condensation technology allows nations with severely limited budgets to aggressively force rain out of passing cloud systems. They do not have to wait for the moisture to naturally precipitate over their agricultural centers. They can reach up into the troposphere and wring it out on command. Look at the positioning of this drone swarm. They are hovering precisely 1 mile inside their own airspace. They are artificially triggering a massive downpour before those natural cloud systems can drift over the border into neighboring hostile countries. It is a surgical strike, targeting the enemy's future water supply. The theft happens entirely up in the sky. The atmospheric physicist realizes the catastrophic downstream effects. By forcing the rain to fall here, the neighboring country is guaranteed a man-made drought. A dry riverbed on the other side of this border will stay dry. An entire harvest will fail because the precipitation was mathematically hijacked before it could cross the imaginary geopolitical line on a map. This marks a terrifying shift in global conflict. This creates a direct kinetic conflict over atmospheric water vapor. Water is no longer a shared, naturally circulating planetary resource. It is a highly contested, strictly finite asset. We are witnessing the birth of localized weather piracy, where intercepting moisture is legally indistinguishable from an act of war. We have completely turned the sky into a localized, cutthroat tactical zone. The old treaties meant nothing. Stealing your neighbor's rain is no longer an abstract environmental debate. It is a matter of absolute national survival. If you cannot afford a drone swarm to protect your incoming weather fronts, your population will starve. The front line is now everywhere. The first massive drops of artificially induced rain begin to hit the scorching desert sand. The physicist wipes the mud from the tablet screen, the physical evidence of a successful atmospheric heist. The enemy across the border has no idea that their vital seasonal rainfall was just stolen by 50 cheap pieces of plastic and a battery-powered laser grid. The radar shows the moisture completely draining from the atmospheric column. The clouds drifting across the border are now dead, empty husks. The drone swarm descends, having completed its silent raid. The atmosphere has been fully weaponized on a guerrilla budget, and the invisible wars for the very water vapor we breathe have officially, irreversibly begun. The localized skirmishes over a few storm clouds mean nothing when you observe the Earth from the cold silence of low orbit. Looking down from the International Space Station, the tactical reality of those borderland laser drone swarms vanishes into the vastness. What remains is the terrifying silence after the storm, a sweeping view of our fragile habitat suspended in the absolute zero of space. From up here, the atmosphere is just a paper-thin blue line separating everything we love from the lethal void. I have watched military operations tear up the Earth, but looking at this planetary membrane, the true scale of the battlefield becomes clear. We are no longer observing this as meteorologists or generals. We are all civilians standing in the crossfire of a completely invisible world war. To understand what is happening, you have to accept the brutal math of our existence. The Earth's atmosphere holds approximately 37 million billion gallons of water at any given moment. It might sound infinite, but it is a strictly closed thermodynamic loop. Nothing leaves, and nothing new enters. The planet is a sealed pressure cooker, and we have just figured out how to hack the thermostat. Because this system is entirely closed, the fundamental law of meteorological warfare is an uncompromising zero-sum game. Every single drop of artificially induced rain we force down in one region guarantees a corresponding devastating drought in another. When a superpower decides to cool its own hemisphere, it is actively choosing to collapse the agricultural backbone of someone else's continent. Think about the journey we have taken to reach this precipice. In 1967, We thought dumping silver iodide over the Ho Chi Minh Trail to wash out dirt roads was the apex of tactical ingenuity. We viewed the sky as a physical obstacle to overcome. Today, we have mapped the thermals and weaponized the jet stream. We transformed the natural world into a programmable, high-yield explosive. I have reported from the aftermath of kinetic strikes, where you can count the craters and weigh the shrapnel. But this new theater of combat leaves absolutely no trace. When an ionospheric heater redirects the polar jet stream by 50 miles, it locks a high-pressure dome over a rival nation. The crops fail, the people starve, and the aggressor offers condolences for the tragic natural disaster. The alarm bells are not going to sound. The sirens will not wail. The first casualty of this conflict is the truth itself, because the boundary between a tragic act of nature and a deliberate, hostile first strike has vanished permanently. If an enemy can cripple your food supply chain using algorithms and invisible radio frequency energy, you are already living in the blast radius without knowing it. For 70 years, humanity survived by balancing on the edge of mutually assured destruction through thermonuclear fire. We built concrete bunkers and stockpiled iodine, waiting for a flash of light that never came. But the ultimate threat of the 21st century is completely silent. It is the untraceable weaponization of the sky above us, quietly dismantling the ecosystem, piece by piece. There is no diplomatic off-ramp left, because the 1977 United Nations Treaty essentially legalized this apocalypse by calling it climate mitigation. As long as a nation claims it is saving the planet, it can pump sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere or blast the ionosphere with impunity. We built a legal shield for the very technologies that are actively tearing our weather systems apart. We survived the 20th century, but the storm we are walking into now is entirely of our own making. If you look at the clouds today and feel that cold dread, if this investigation has fundamentally shifted how you understand the daily forecast, hit the subscribe button to continue this research with me. We have to map these invisible front lines together before the next manufactured drought hits. The casualty reports of tomorrow will not list bullet wounds or blast traumas. They will list crop failures, heat waves, and missing monsoons. I have seen the blueprints, I've watched the laser grids fire, and I can tell you that the weapons are already drawn. We are no longer fighting battles within our environment. We have arrogant, fatally flawed men fighting with the environment itself. The ticking clock has already hit zero, and we are just waiting for the shock wave to catch up. Look up at the sky. It is no longer a natural phenomenon, governed by the random chaos of fluid dynamics. It is a highly contested, strictly finite battle space. Every cloud bank is a reservoir, and every thermal gradient is a tactical advantage. We have turned the breath of the earth into a loaded gun. We spent thousands of years looking up at the heavens to find meaning, completely unaware that we would eventually turn the atmosphere itself into the ultimate instrument of our own destruction. The sky is falling, but it is falling exactly where the algorithms command it to. The storm is here, and there is nowhere left to take cover. We survived today. That is what matters. Signing off.